to another edition of the Comic Anthologist. And if you're tuning in for the first time,
Hit that subscribe button, y'all.
and also next time, hit that bell just to get any kind of alerts and things or whatnot, so things that we're going to be presenting in the near future. Now today we are going to talk about Batman, who was created by Bob Kane back in 1939.
With Bill Finger.
With Bill Finger. Yes, created back in 1939, but we're going to focus in on a particular storyline, which was called Knightfall.
Well, everybody knows the backstory of, before we get into Knightfall. We already know the backstory of Batman being Bruce Wayne. We've seen it in the media, in the movies.
And we've seen him multiple times in several movies, including the iterations that took place in the 40s, which was the serialized version.
Right.
And then we also, we're talking about the media versions of Batman. We're not talking about the specific books.
But then we just lit briefly with the character. Basically, Batman was created as a result of his parents being killed in Crime Alley in Gotham City by a mugger who killed both his mom and dad right in front of Bruce Wayne and basically traumatized him, which eventually led him, as he got older, into becoming, because he wanted justice for the deaths of his parents, into eventually becoming the Batman, and the way he wanted to present himself as a fear detriment to criminals, because he always said criminals are always a superstitious and cowardly lot.
Exactly.
Yeah, so now, getting to the story of Batman Knightfall, basically, in the story, this is one of the cases where Batman was pushed to his limits, and it was also dealing with the first appearance. Well, around that time, there was the first appearance of a character known as Bane as well.
No, Bane made his first appearance in the graphic novel, or rather,
actually, it's a one-shot
graphic novel. At the time, they called them the special books.
Actually, a comic book, just one shot.
Okay, it was a one-shot comic book called
The Vengeance of Bane.
It wouldn't specify which South American country, but all it boiled down to... Santa Precia. Okay. But what it boiled down to is that his father died in prison, and basically his mother was pregnant with him. But the thing was that the warden had said, okay, this is what's going to happen. If it's a boy that's born, he's going to have to finish out his father's sentence in prison. Now, if it's a girl, we'll let the mother and girl go. Well, as it turns out, she had a boy, and that boy ended up becoming Bane because he ended up having to serve out his father's prison terms, but whatnot. But he ended up also volunteering for an experimental process, which gave him the superpowers that he has, which pumps him up.
It was a chemical, a drug induced. I wouldn't say induced. It was called Venom.
Yes.
And so there was a series in Legends of the Dark Knight back in the early '90s where there was a series called Venom. This predated The Vengeance of Bane.
Right.
And so basically what went down is Batman had taken the earlier version of Venom, and he used it on himself, and he was beating down criminals like it. And so what he did for 30 days, he stayed in the Batcave. He told Alfred not to come into the Batcave, not to disturb him or whatever. And Alfred was checking on him every day, turning on the I forgot what kind of speaker or something.
Basically, he turned on the sound system.
The sound system, right. And he heard Bruce going through
screaming and howling through and through because he was going through the
withdrawal. The detox situation from taking all that venom.
He was having the withdrawal symptoms, but he was detoxing from having venom in his system because venom, he believed, made him addicted to it, but also it didn't give him his edge on crime because he uses his mental and physical prowess in dealing with the criminals. Now, venom, it gave him an extra adage, making him a little bit super strong. But once he realized that it was an unfair advantage,
and also eventually it would kill him.
Exactly. He decided to just go ahead and detox from it, walk away from it, and get back to doing what he was doing.
Because that was a pretty interesting series when that came out.
Yeah, it was.
Because I believe it was about 5 or 6 parts, but. Now, for Knightfall, then, when the story kicks in, Batman is now, him and Robin have been fighting crime or whatnot, but Bane wanted to take Gotham City for himself.
Yes, he did.
From the criminal element. And so what he did was he put Batman through a gauntlet by basically releasing the inmates of Arkham Asylum. Joker, the Riddler,
Zaz.
Killer Croc. I mean, it was basically a gauntlet, and Batman...
It was his rogues gallery of criminals, and that's what it was. But he kept having to fight and defeat them without getting any rest.
And plus, he was also on borderline on having the flu.
Exactly.
Yeah,
He was basically fighting an illness and exhaustion. So by the time Bane got to him, when he put the last criminal back where he's supposed to put them back,
he pulled it right over his head and said, "Okay, let's go." And so then it was a one-sided battle in which
he was worn out.
He was worn out, and Batman eventually was broken by Bane by taking him over his knee, slamming him over his knee and breaking his back, effectively paralyzing him below his waist.
Right.
And so, with that being said, there was a new protector that had to step up, a new Batman, and they had to get this character by the name of Azrael, which that was also introduced as a sort of Azrael. So basically, Azrael took over as Batman, but his methods were so far and brutal, extreme that him and Robin had a falling out, and it got to the point where Azrael eventually killed a criminal known as Abattoir. And so basically, Bruce knew that he had to get back into being the Batman, but
because he had crossed the line.
Right. And so basically the bottom line is what had to happen was Azrael was like a force of nature, whereas Batman was very calculating whenever he took down criminals or whatnot.
Right.
The way how Bruce Wayne's back was healed was there was a doctor who was attending to him at the time when his back was broken. Her name was Dr. Chandra Consalvi. Now, she had latent metahuman powers, which were enhanced by her brother. And basically, but they were the kind of powers that basically, you know, in comic books, they always write these loopholes to bring the regular characters back. Basically, in a nutshell, during the events of, there was Knightfall, Knightquest, and Knightsend. Knightquest is during the time when Azrael was completely taken over as Batman. And they showed a little bit of Bruce Wayne trying to recuperate, sitting in a wheelchair or whatnot.
And the outfit that Azrael had created for himself in terms of being the new Batman
was a bit extreme.
It was extreme and was so far removed from the original version
Right.
of the Bat outfit. And he even took down Bane,
Right.
but he took down Bane in an extremely brutal way. So much so that he cut him off from his venom, as you already know his signature of having that device on his arm.
Right.
But used batarangs almost like a bullet
Right.
to cut off his venom and knock him completely on his tail.
Right.
And as a result, then that's when those brutal methods were used towards the other criminals, and then that's when he did cross the line, and then that's when Bruce Wayne had to say, I had to take back the mantle of the Bat.
And see, basically during that time too, that was during Knightquest. Now Knightsend, that's the one where Bruce Wayne comes back, because by that point, that same particular doctor, Dr. Chandra Consalvi, she had her latent psychic powers or powers that she had. That's what helped heal Bruce Wayne's back, but it was at the cost of her sanity, which reverted her mentality back to that of a little girl. And so Bruce had put her into a mental institution so that she could be looked after for healing, also not for healing her back, but he also fell in love with her, but he knew he couldn't be with her.
Right.
So basically then, during Knightsend, Bruce Wayne had to go through a gauntlet of fighting martial arts masters through this martial arts villain known as Lady Shiva.
I remember Shiva.
And so basically she was forcing him to wear a ninja outfit with a bat mask on, but the problem was, because once Bruce got wind of what Azrael was doing, he knew he had to take the mantle back. So basically what had to happen was he put the mask on, and he had to fight those kung fu masters. But this was the catch that Lady Shiva wanted him to do:
What was that?
take a life.
He wouldn't do it.
And he wouldn't do it.
Wasn't that incorporated into the? We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, she wanted him to take a life because they would not stop until he took a life. Only to find out that Bruce had committed an act which kind of cut off the blood flow or what he did, and then brought that person back, or he revived that person. Then the final part of Knightsend was Bruce. Every issue of that part of Knightsend, up until the point where he put the bat costume on, he would always walk to the edge and look over the city of Gotham City, and then he would feel like, no, I'm not ready yet. And each issue, it kept getting more and more where he looked over the edge, and it's like, no, I'm not ready yet. No, I'm not. I can't do this yet. And more, as the situation with Azrael was worsening, he knew something was up. Until finally, he took the plunge and did what he needed to do.
And I'm getting it.
And that's kind of like, I would say, how I interpret it, because that's been like one of my favorite stories, is because here you had this character, I mean, it's endured the test of time and everything, but he had been broken, had to build himself back up. And then when you think you're ready to go out and get back into the world again, he was afraid. He was like, he didn't think he was, even though he was the master of fear, of putting fear into criminals' hearts, but to see him stand over the edge and then kind of come back, and he was like, no, I'm not ready yet. But I wouldn't even call it fear, but he just felt he wasn't ready. But then eventually he took that plunge and did what he needed to do.
Let me interject on this one.
What?
But you know what that just tells me? One simple thing.
What?
He's not superhuman.
No, he's not.
He's human.
Yeah.
And basically he fell to just the human frailties that we all have. And basically, until he was mentally ready, mentally strong to handle what needed to be handled, he had to basically face his demons before he jumped back into the fray.
It didn't have to be like a brutal battle or anything of a physical battle,
but it was more of a battle of wills.
A battle of wills and a battle of more spiritual and intellect, because at some point, Azrael was chasing down Bruce Wayne. Near the Batcave, in like one of the tunnels near the Batcave, and Azrael was still thinking, "I'm going to get after you." And I know I'm the true bat, but he had to keep taking off his armor.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. To interject that, he had to take off a piece of his armor
each part. Every time he got closer to Batman.
Yep, and he made him take it off to the point where when he finally got into the light,
which Batman had exposed him to the daylight, and then once he got exposed to daylight, he looked at Batman and said, "No, you're the one true Batman." He took off his helmet because something
in him snapped, and he finally realized. He says, "No, Bruce Wayne is the true heir to the Batman."
Because Azrael, we'll talk about that another time. I would say that was like one of my favorite Batman stories from back in the day. Not only that, but also the movie that came out back in 2012, which was part of the Dark Knight trilogy, Dark Knight Rises.
Right.
That movie was influenced. Part of that movie was influenced by Batman Knightfall, but it was also influenced by The Dark Knight Returns, because Bruce Wayne coming back years later after the end of The Dark Knight.
And The Dark Knight Returns, we're going to do another one about that one later, when Bruce Wayne is an aged crime fighter who had stayed out of the limelight, stayed out of the spotlight of being Batman for 10 years before having returned to the mantle of the Bat.
And then another story that we'll touch upon too, that the movie The Dark Knight Rises was also influenced by No Man's Land. Batman No Man's Land.
Very true.
And so, but heavily, especially in Dark Knight Rises, that was heavily influenced by Knightfall, just for the simple fact of Bane doing what he did in the film, taking Batman and cracking him over his knee, and beating him brutally.
Right.
With that fight. So, with that being said, you got any final words on Knightfall?
No final words on Knightfall, because I've learned a lot myself in terms of reading it. Because even though I'm an avid reader of the Batman comics, there's still other things that I'm still learning about the character and about the stories that come with it. So, believe me, it's one of those things that one of those stories I like to revisit and reread from time to time.
Now, one of the things I want to say too, that it was done horribly with Bane, was in Batman and Robin, which
that was just terrible.
It was just straight terrible.
Just terrible.
No.
Don't ever waste your time. Put it to you this way: if you watch that movie, I guarantee you, at the end of that movie,
you're gonna get mad for you. You want your time back.
Yeah. Now you don't want to spend your money. Just you'll want your time
back. And then plus you'll be like looking at like Poison Ivy in the film, saying curses. I'm like, who in the hell says that now?
My thing is, who created that dialogue in the first place?
Yeah, tell me about it. Just no.
Any case, this is the Comic Anthologist, and thank you for tuning in, and please hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so, and also if you need to reach us with any kind of questions, you could reach us at thecomicanthologist@gmail.com. Until then, signing out, and until the next time.